Today on the Queen Amy Show, I am honored to welcome Kathleen LaRoe-Higgs, also known as Katie. She is a licensed psychotherapist from USC and has a master's in social work. She's got a wealth of expertise in trauma and integrative healing, and she holds certifications as a clinical trauma professional too, mental health integrative medicine provider, neuropsychology practitioner, and is a specialist in psychedelic healing, preparation, and integration. Katie has dedicated her career to working extensively with military veterans, first responders, and special operations personnel since 2008. She dives into the shadow aspects of humanity and guides them to find grace and wisdom through mind, body, and soul connections. With over 20 years of experience in expanded consciousness, she has witnessed the profound healing powers of plant medicines, breathwork, meditation, and present moment awareness. Her work with organizations like the Illuminating Collective and the Mission Within incorporates medicines such as ibogaine, 5-MeO-DMT, psilocybin, hachumama, and MDMA. Katie's journey is deeply influenced by indigenous rituals and teachings, honoring her mentors from traditions including Native American, Huichol, Shipibo, and Bwiti. Please join me in welcoming the deeply insightful and ever experienced Katie LaRoe-Higgs. All right. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of the meme or the part in the Mean Girls show where Regina George's mom's like, I'm not a regular mom, I'm a cool mom. Well, this is my favorite therapist in the world, and she is not a regular psychotherapist. She is a cool psychotherapist. So, Katie, welcome to the show.
Hello, thank you so much for having me on.
I am so excited to jump in and talk to you today. So, Katie and I have not only been through a healing retreat together, she was one of the facilitators and healers, but we've had a few sessions as well. And she's so unique in the fact that she does not approach therapy or healing in the Western medicine sense, where for veterans like me and probably first responders as well, where you've had just such a deep wound of what talk therapy is and it doesn't work for you and you find it frustrating. Katie was like a breath of fresh air, like the first deep breath I have had in so many years, over 10 years of looking for treatment and help. And so I'm so grateful that you're spending your time with me today. But I'm sure that there's just going to be so many nuggets of wisdom that we get out of this episode that will help other veterans and first responders as well, and those struggling with mental health. So, I wanted just to start the show off here today, just talking a little bit about. I'd love to know a little bit about your journey getting into the healing space and how you ended up becoming all things amazing, Katie, that you are today. Like, what brought you to the healing space?
Yeah, that's one of those long stories, so we'll try to shorten it up.
Yeah.
Essentially, I think all of our foundations are pretty set as children for what it is that becomes our purpose later on in life, or what it is that we experience later on in life, according to what we've experienced as little ones. I had a lot of childhood trauma. Dad was highly abusive, physically, emotionally, sexually, all that. Went to prison when I was about 4. I think I was 4. Um, Children who grow up in really abusive households tend to have these like extra sensory spidey senses where they know kind of what's happening energetically. And so I think that really was the basis of what brought me into this realm, is that I just had this really dialed in perception of being able to read between the lines, both energetically and emotionally with people. Always had a great relationship with plants, with animals, with energy, just in general. My mom had surgery on both of her feet when I think I was in 3rd grade. I remember walking in after she came home from surgery and I just had this like feeling all over my body. Started working with energy with my mom on her feet. She was up and walking in, I think, 2 weeks instead of the 4 weeks that they told her it would be. So that kind of was the foundation of what brought me into probably the plant medicine world, although it was not something that I actively pursued. I actually voted psychedelics off of the ballot years ago, because I grew up in the, war on drugs
Oh,
demographic. So I remember what it looked like to turn on the TV and watch an egg frying in a pan. I'm like, this is your brain on drugs. And so it was, psychedelics were they were bad to me. But what ended up happening was I really started moving down the path of looking at expanded states of consciousness with mindfulness, meditation, breath work, and even energy work. And I began working for an intensive outpatient therapy program in San Diego for PTSD and trauma, specifically for veterans initially. And during your intro, you were talking about talk therapy. It's like blah, 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 blah. I mean, really, sometimes what we're doing is we're just reinforcing those neurological pathways. And so what we started initiating was less talk therapy, more body-centered therapy. So we were doing more of like the somatic experiencing and the mindfulness and the meditation and getting people connected to their body again, because oftentimes with trauma, people are not connected to their body. They are dissociated or they're fully in their mind. They don't have sensation. And so connecting people back into their body became a really important aspect of their post-traumatic recovery. And I had worked in the special operations community down at the Naval Amphibious Base starting in like 2008. And so I got to know, a bunch of SEALs and their families, which ultimately what happened was as I was working in IOP, I had a friend who I was just watching him and his entire life had changed. He went from being very disconnected with his family and drinking a lot and still fighting a lot as a grown-ass man. And all of a sudden he was spending time with his wife and his kids and his family. And he just became this really incredible leader within the community. And he reached out to me and he was like, bro, there's this doc. You have to meet this doctor. And I was like, yeah, I've noticed some changes with you. He's like, there's this medicine. I went down to Mexico. I did it. And now I'm, 100 times better. So I had him pointing me in the direction of an organization that treated special operations with ibogaine and bufo down in Mexico. And then I had a fellow therapist who had a friend who was trying to get her to go down. And she didn't want to do it. So she's like, well, what about Katie? So I basically had two people at the exact same time leading me to this organization that worked with ibogaine and 5-MeO down in Mexico. I went down there 7 years ago and it's just been my shtick since. It kind of fell in. I wasn't looking for it, but here I am. It's pretty much my entire life is helping people learn how to navigate and prepare for psychedelics or, make sense of it and start creating really positive habits after the fact. So that's what brought me into the plant medicine space. Long story, tried to shorten it up. There's a lot more, but
No, it's perfect and,
many
and
chapters.
beautiful. Yeah, thank you for sharing. One of the things I that stood out about you to me when I first met you is I was required to have a session with you to go to this plant medicine retreat that I went to for
Mm-hmm.
healing my own issues, and I was a little apprehensive at first. Like, talk therapy, going through the VA system had always been very triggering for me. And it was like, great, I'm going to have to start over and go and waste an hour of this person's time as well as my own, talking about crap that I don't want to talk about, that's just annoying and triggering for me. And that's just how I view therapy. And that's how a lot of people, especially
Yeah.
veterans and first responders, view therapy. It's like annoying. I don't want to have to do this. And one
Yep.
of the most magical things about our first meeting was you're like, we don't need to talk about any of that stuff. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't, need to do that. I don't have to do that. It's probably not beneficial for me to do that. And I was like, okay, I'm listening. I'm listening. And I got really excited because instead we focused on dealing with the triggers that I was having. And we focused on going through working through them when I feel triggers. I remember telling you in our first session, like how much I was struggling with driving in a car in LA traffic and what a trigger that was for me, and how like I became this other version of myself, just angry and bitter. And your response to me during that was like, just helping me get through those moments and giving me tools and techniques like breathing and all of these different things.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the first time I left a session like, oh my gosh, wait, this is a unique approach. This is different. This is not the same. This is hope, hope at the end of the day. And I got so excited. I'm like, I need to like talk to you all the time. So I definitely think that is, a beautiful reflection of you and your personality and everything and your ability to connect with people, but also the things that you did are repeatable and other
Hmm.
therapists can learn them and do them. And there are techniques that you're using that are abnormal to what is so common in Western medicine. And so these are things that other therapists can learn. And we can expand this approach wider, this net wider, to help
Hmm.
more veterans and help more people. And that's the thing that got me the most excited to have you on the show today is your approach to healing is so unique. So I'd love to talk a little bit about, if you wouldn't mind sharing, what are some of the things that you do today with veterans? You work with some elite veterans in our community, some of the most incredible, I don't, there's really no better word than elite to use, and deal with some of the deepest issues that are possible for a veteran to have.
Hmm.
Talk to me about some of your methodologies and some of your approaches to that work.
I think the foundation at any point in time is going to be around creating a sense of presence in the body. So we're regulating the nervous system, we're looking at emotional regulation, we're catching our thoughts when they happen, we're, really, really focusing on slowing down the parasympathetic nervous system. That's so important because if our mind is racing, we are not thinking. Um, it's not our I do a lot of psychoeducation with people so that they understand what it is that's happening and why it's happening. So I kind of like to lean in on the woo and the science at the same time, which I think is a little bit more of that unique approach that you talk about. And I'm a human. I'm human oriented. I want that connection. I want people to co-regulate. I find that if we have positive relationships with people and we feel really seen and we feel really heard, we're much more able to open up. So that's a massive aspect to this as well, is just being able to show up and be present. And then, as you said, give people the tools that they need in order to manage the symptoms of what's coming up, because it's oftentimes with trauma, we don't know what the fuck it is, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
if trauma is happening when we're pre-verbal, we don't even have words for it. And then if our brain did us a favor and helped us to dissociate, then when other traumatic things happen later on in our life, we weren't even present for it. So we don't even know what it is. So telling the story is not necessarily helpful. It can be. There are definitely modalities that do dive into that. It's not my forte. I like working with the body. I like working with the spirit. I like working with the soul. I like, ensuring that people are able to find and resource areas within their body and their environment that allow them to be really present. And if we can do that, then even when you have a memory that pops up of something that was really negative or difficult or challenging, if you have the tools to be able to navigate it, it's not going to hijack you. It's not going to take you over. And if it does, then hopefully it just takes you over for a shorter period of time, and maybe the extent of the severity is lower. So, this work is not necessarily meant to get rid of these things. There's nothing to get rid of. It's a matter of just incorporating all of these pieces within us so that we feel more whole. I have a big belief that when something traumatic happens to us, there's a part of us that we kind of leave behind. There's a part of us, that helplessness part or our soul part or a part of our survival, that it kind of drops off. And so when we go in and we do this work and we create these safe spaces and we can resource internally, it's almost like we create an opening for that part to come back because we can then manage it.
Mm. I love that. For me, it just brought up this vision of, like, how we will often get upset with children when they're being children, or like, oh, they're enjoying and having fun. They're using their imagination. It's like annoying for some adults. And I love the analogy that you just mentioned about, how we're leaving parts of ourselves. Like as we go through life, we're, forgetting that we have this beautiful innocence and joy and all of that we're born with
Yeah.
inherently, and we lose that as we go through life. And I think when we can release our need to be protected and guarded and all of that, we can get back into that joy that kids have. So
Mm-hmm.
that's the vision that I got as you
Mm-hmm.
were saying that. I love that so much. Do you have any tips for people who are currently struggling that are listening to this episode with mental health, of how to maybe even after this episode, just to take some time and anything that you would encourage them to try and do to get back in their body as you're suggesting?
Absolutely. Breathe. Just breathe. Step number one is get in connection to moving air from here all the way down into here. When we're anxious or we're living in kind of that trauma breath, we're typically breathing into this top portion of our lungs. The problem with that is that we have what's called the vagus nerve, and it goes all the way from our brainstem and it kind of wanders down. I love the name of it because if you've ever been to Las Vegas and you've been inside of a casino, you know that finding your way out of the casino is impossible because they just wind you around and around and around. So the vagal nerve actually winds around your internal organs. And so when we breathe all the way down into our belly, we're compressing that vagal nerve in between our organs. We're also utilizing our ribs and our lungs to activate it. And so it automatically is calming down the sympathetic nervous system, the parasympathetic, which is like a parachute to slow it down. That's the biggest thing. I will tell my clients, breathe every single hour. You have to breathe anyway, so you might as well do it on purpose. You heard me say that a lot. It doesn't cost anything. It's free to you. You're nourishing your body. You're getting in touch with it. You're calming your nervous system down. And in order to really do that, there's a number of different breaths that are super helpful. You can do like a box breath, which is like inhaling for 4, holding for 4, exhaling for 4, holding for 4 on repeat. I usually like to encourage a little bit of body movement while I'm doing it. So if somebody, for those people who are watching this, it might be inhaling, exhaling, or holding, exhaling, and then holding. When we're doing that, because we're basing this also with movement, we're moving from the right side of the brain to the left side of the brain. That can be really helpful. So that's going to be the box breath. A diaphragmatic or a belly breath is another option, which is breathing in for like 4 or 5, and then exhaling. So you're exhaling for about twice the amount of time. I really like that one, but the trick to both of those is you have to pull the belly button back towards the spine. And 5 to 10 breaths is usually sufficient. Typically, what people find is that they begin to feel like they're activating more frequently, but they're typically not. It's just that they're in touch with what it is that's happening in their body. And so they're like, this is driving me crazy. It's making me more anxious. You're actually just feeling your anxiety more than you have before. But it just takes practice. It's a practice. You're learning how to breathe. You're learning how to be in your body. So, yeah, just always encouraging people to move into that nervous system regulation is the most critical thing. And there's tons of resources online. There's some really good nervous system regulation coaches out there, even on YouTube. Irene Lyons is fantastic. She's got tons of free content. But also, just do some education around what it is that's happening in the body. We've got lots of really wonderful authors and researchers out there right now who are talking about the ways that trauma is stored in the body and why it comes out in the way that it does. And so, I always encourage people, look up Gabor Mate, and some of the research that he's done around the way that trauma is stored in the body. Anyway, there's tons of people that people can look up, but familiarize yourself with the fact that what you're experiencing is normal, because trauma is different for every single person, but the way that it presents typically is pretty consistent.
I think it's so powerful that you're talking a lot about the body. And this is one of the reasons why I emphasize that, Katie is such a great person to be addressing topics about PTSD and trauma, because we in Western society have so commonly considered these things to be living in our brain, that there's something wrong with our brains, our minds, right? We're forgetting that our body is connected to our brains, and everything that goes on in real life, it gets stored in our bodies. And so
Mm-hmm.
I did not understand the complexity of that. As I've been going through my own trauma and trying to figure out how to heal it for the last 10 or so years, after I came back from Afghanistan, I constantly was saying things like, I just want to shut my brain off. I want to shut my mind
Mm-hmm.
off. I wish that I stopped having these thoughts. I wish that I could stop having these dreams, things like that. But when I was doing the work that I've been doing over the last few months, it's all been body focused. It
Mm-hmm.
hasn't been, let me go relive my trauma and do talk therapy. It has been,
Mm-hmm.
how can I move my body? How can I learn how to breathe better? How can I do somatic release work with my body? And that has what has,
Mm-hmm.
for the first time in over 10 years, and trying all the traditional things that we hear of in Western medicine, it's the first time that trauma has actually moved out of my body, and I
Mm-hmm.
found relief. So I cannot emphasize and champion that message enough. And thanks for that. I wanted to also talk about your view. You have a great vantage point on what is happening with the migration of old Western medicine ways for healing PTSD and trauma into new experiential alternative healing resources. And I'll be more clear. I got thrown a bottle of Ambien and SSRIs, over in Afghanistan, and told that these are the things I need to heal me. And then for years, I was on various kinds of medicines, drugs that the VA system had thrown at me. I had sleep issues. I was addicted to sleep medicine. I had SSRI issues. In fact, one of my leaders in the military turned around and said, "Hey, you're drooling." Like I had the wrong dose,
Mm-hmm.
like just a lot of struggles. And my relationships were bad. I couldn't hold a job, right? Like I was having all kinds of issues. And then I found plant medicine. And by the way, none of those things, none of those Western medicine things helped. They didn't even chip at. In fact, it made it worse. They made everything worse for me. When I found plant medicine, and for those listening, I had psilocybin and I had DMT and I had MDMA in a structured, organized, professional plant medicine retreat designed to help military veterans and first responders and those struggling with mental health issues. And I had facilitators around with me. So this wasn't like I was doing it at home. This was a very professional environment, a very therapeutic environment. And I had one retreat, so 1 week. And I left that retreat what I would say healed. I have not had anxiety since, and this is months later now. I'm saying this. I have not had a single bout of anxiety. I don't have depression. I'm happy. I'm enjoying life, and this is the first time I can say these things with authenticity and truth in my whole being in well over 12 years. So tell me a little bit about, from your perspective, because you deal with a lot of people. I'm just one voice, one person. You deal with hundreds and hundreds of people. And so I'd love to hear your experience being a psychotherapist and having all of these amazing qualifications that you have. Obviously, you've seen the old ways. You're married to a military veteran as well. You've seen the old ways of working where, the outdated, the SSRIs, the sleep medications, all of that. And now you're very experienced and you're a facilitator in plant medicine. Tell me about that journey and what healing you've experienced and witnessed over the last couple of years.
Mm-hmm. It's really interesting. My husband and I have this conversation a lot around um, the VA and medications, and they're trying. I really see them kind of moving in the direction of being able to utilize more natural-based medicine, which is really, really beautiful. Natural-based medicine, including like the things that we can do for ourselves with breathwork, meditation, mindfulness, present moment focus, etc. Um, but drugs numb things out, right? The purpose of a drug is to not feel what you're feeling. Medicines, on the other hand, allow us to feel it and move into it. So when we talk about these psychedelic medicines, I think that there's a perception still with certain people that it is a drug. It's not. There's nothing that's being numbed with these experiences. As a matter of fact, we're really going down. You hear me talk about like going down to the bottom of the pond and just drudging it up. And anything that is in there is going to be released, and it's going to float up to the top so you can see it. So it's like, why the heck is there a 73 Ford Chevy or Ford Hood like floating at the top? And what about that old bottle? And like all of these things in our lives, so that we can look at it and manage it, and have some decision around what it is that we're engaging in. You know, these plant medicines don't take away our choice, but it's like if you're in jujitsu and you get, you know, choked, you're being choked, what they do is that they allow you a little bit of space so that you can then reorient your body so that you can then breathe. So they offer you the space to be able to have a decision in what it is that's happening. So for a lot of people, I say, you know, if you are a vessel, right?
She's holding up a
And
cup of water for those
I'm
listening at
holding,
home.
okay, yes. So for those of you who can't see me, I'm holding up a cup of water, and what this represents is the capacity of our body and our nervous system to hold. So for some people, their cup might only be half full. So they've got, you know, the other half of the cup that they can fill up before they end up kind of in an emotional crisis. For people who have a lot of trauma, the cup is already full. So they're at like 99% full. So anything that drops in is going to topple over the top. So when people come to me and they're like, I don't know, Katie, I'm a light switch, like I'm fine. And then all of a sudden I'm like popping off at my kid and I'm yelling at them like they're a bud student. It's like, well, you're not a light switch. You're just not able to read the cues because your nervous system is too full. So plant medicines help to kind of go in and pour out the cup so that we have a little bit more room in there for whatever is coming our way. And some of the ways that it does this is, you know, I mentioned Gabor Mate, Peter Levine. There's a lot of research that's showing that our body, our connective tissues, our cells store trauma. And so plant medicines will go in there, and it's kind of like opening up the drawers and being like, you've been trying to wear this pair of pants since you were 3 years old. Get rid of that, right? Like, so they kind of go in and they remove all of these things that don't necessarily serve us. But part of the reactivity that we also have, especially if you've had a lifelong of trauma, it's inflammation based, right? Like if we are chronically inflamed, how in the world are we going to be able to breathe and sleep and rest and digest food, right? Because if we're always in a state of fight or flight, or if we're totally shut down, our bodies are not taking in the nutrients, which means that, you know, our gut microbiome is all kinds of jacked up. We don't have the right amount of serotonin. We don't have the neurotransmitters that we need. And so medicines help us to reset all of that, as well as resetting the aspects of the actual brain, creating blood flow into the areas that have been underutilized, or especially like with TBI, right? Like we have to increase blood flow to certain areas, and that's exactly what it does. So our neurology is not just in our brain, it's in our body, but the control center is the gut, the heart, and the brain. And so we have to create communication between all of those. And that's part of what plant medicine does, is it increases blood flow, helps us to create new neurological pathways. It gives us all of that, you know, we call it like neuroflexibility, right? It allows us to be able to, instead of choosing the path that we've always been choosing, there's a period of time where it's actually easier to create new habits after. But there's lots of ways that we can get there. It doesn't always have to be plant medicines either. Mindfulness, meditation, breath work. Anytime you're doing anything different, like you're creating neuroplasticity, you're already changing the neurology of your body and your brain. Psychedelics just tend to help it move faster in that direction. And, you know, that said, too fast, too soon is not always healthy either, which is why, you know, with the organization that you're aware of, that you came through, we have a heavier emphasis on preparation, because if we can get people into creating those positive habits and getting comfortable being in their body and navigating the things that are coming up, they're more ready for these big experiences. Because and psychedelics, they're just not appropriate for absolutely everybody either. And so, there's that aspect of ensuring readiness and appropriateness, which is why it's so important to work with organizations that are professionally vetting people to come through and not just, popping 5 grams of psilocybin and hanging out on your own if you've never had any experience with them before.
Powerful. I also want to emphasize as we start talking about integration here in a minute, the power of looking at your life holistically 360 degrees, because there's this belief that one thing, and this is common, you can apply this to basically anything in life that you would encounter. There's a belief that one thing is going to fix everything. So a lot of one example is like, if I marry this guy, the rest of my life is going to be perfect.
Mm-hmm.
If I have a baby, that's going to fix a relationship, right? There's always this belief that one thing is going to fix something. If my nose
Right.
was this shape, I would feel pretty about myself, right? If I had a
Mm-hmm.
bunch of money, all my problems would go away. So, and that's a common belief system that this one thing will fix everything. And
Mm-hmm.
with medicine, if we're looking at whether that's over the counter Western pharmaceutical prescription drugs, if I take these drugs, that will fix it. If I go to a plant medicine retreat, that will fix it. And that's not the case, right? So, one of the things that I want to emphasize as I talk about plant medicine with everybody is, I'm sitting here saying I am healed. And I mean that genuinely. Like, I have zero anxiety. Okay, great. Well, what did that look like for me? That looked like uprooting my entire existence as I knew it before. So that means I removed friends that I thought were friends that weren't actually friends. I stopped drinking caffeine because caffeine was overloading my nervous system, and it
Mm-hmm.
was making it so I had anxiety all the time, and I was living in a
Mm-hmm.
constant state of fight or flight. So I quit drinking caffeine. So I am sober of caffeine. I don't drink alcohol, right? I do not drink alcohol, because alcohol, I was finding every time I would drink it, I would be in a loop of depression. And so
Mm-hmm.
I got sober, completely 100% sober. And I changed jobs. I, created an environment around me of positivity where I was leaving sticky notes on my mirror of
Mm-hmm.
positive affirmations. I deleted all of the news apps off my phone so I wasn't getting negativity all the time, because we often don't look at what are we consuming, right? If the news is negative all the time, your friends around you are being negative or gossiping about other people or complaining. If you're complaining to yourself, you're beating up yourself. Everything you're
Mm-hmm.
consuming, if it's all negative, right? The foods that you're eating, are they packed with processed chemicals? Are you giving yourself the nutrition or not, right? It's everything you're consuming. You are going to be the result of that. Like,
Mm-hmm.
there's just no other way to frame that. You're going to be the result of what you're consuming. So I did a 360-degree pause on life, evaluated absolutely everything, cut out the stuff that was not serving me, and I went through a plant medicine retreat with professional facilitators, and then went into what the period of state which I'm in now, which is integration. And so obviously you're the best person to talk about it. So tell us, what is integration, Katie?
Integration is all of those things. Yeah, you just schooled everybody on exactly what it is. It is a 360-degree analysis of life and what serves you and what no longer serves you. And so, when we look at integration, hopefully we've already created some positive patterns before we have a psychedelic experience, but it really is about creating a lifestyle of healthy decisions and healthy actions while you're also making sense of your um, psychedelic experience. So I think the biggest thing is anything that you're consuming is either going to nurture or degrade you, right? There's not a whole lot of middle ground in there. So ensuring that you're eating really nutrient dense foods, having new experiences, playing, like go out, play, have fun, lay down and look at the clouds and make shapes out of them again. Like allow your soul to experience life. Do art, do dance, connect with people, journal, get lots of really good sleep. Make sure that your sleep process is really dialed in because sleep is a huge factor of inflammation, which again is going to increase anxiety and depression. So that's really important. Cut out things that numb you out. If it's numbing you, get rid of it. If it's allowing you to be present, that's great. Um, and it's not always about just, people are like, I want this to fix me, but what if it's not about being fixed? What if there's nothing wrong? What if it's just accepting that those things didn't work for you and moving into a space of creating something different? I think sometimes people are just like, I'm so sick, I'm so broken. And it's like, if we're not minding our thoughts, which is another part of integration, watch the way that you're talking to yourself.
Mm.
And just like you said, like, watch the way you're talking about other people. You're as wonderful and incredible and amazing as our brain is. There's also this aspect of our brain that does not understand if you're talking about yourself or if you're talking about somebody else. So if you're speaking negatively about somebody else, your brain interprets that as speaking negatively about you, which is why it's really important to notice what you're listening to, who you're interacting with, and how you're speaking about others and yourself.
Something that
So,
you taught me that I want to make sure we emphasize on this call too is you shared with me the lessons that things that are hard are teaching you. So, like, if
mhm,
we'll just use the example you shared, like if you're talking negatively about someone else, change the language around that. Like instead of being like, oh man, that person is just so annoying, they're frustrating, like what are they doing? They're crazy. How about it's like, what are they teaching me? And that might be
yeah,
patience, it might be
yep,
forgiveness, it might be understanding, right? I love you personally taught me that. And so I look at a lot of those hard things in my life now, whether it's people, places, things. We had camera issues when we were getting started on this session here, and it's like, just be joyful with it and turn it into song. And
yeah.
what is it teaching you? Because it just makes life so much smoother. You can't fight everything.
No, no. It's like I give this analogy that if you're standing in the ocean and a big wave comes and you try to press up against the wave to make it stop, the only thing that's going to happen is it's just going to knock you on your ass, right? So
Mm.
that big wave that's coming in, just like you said, maybe it's teaching us how to be flexible, how to be loosey-goosey, how to just allow things to roll around us. And you can really look at that in terms of any emotion or circumstance that we're feeling. There is a teaching on the other side of it. Just like you said, I saw this meme and it's like, if you ask God to give you patience, you better believe that he's going to give you some trials first, right? Like every single thing and every single person who comes into our life is there to teach us something. And even if that is as simple as you're walking in the grocery store and somebody holds the door open for you and smiles, the teaching is like, wow, it actually feels good to be seen or to have somebody smile at me. And now I can take that smile and I can share it with somebody else.
Mm.
It could be the opposite. They let the door shut in your face and you're like, what a fucking dick. All right,
Yeah.
well, what's that going to teach you? What do we know what's been happening with that person's day? Maybe their kid's in the hospital. Maybe they just lost their mom. Maybe their car just got repossessed. Like, can we have some self-compassion for that person for, maybe not seeing us or understanding or whatever? Like every single person comes to show us something about ourselves. And it used to drive me crazy, especially in the spiritual world. People like everything and everybody is your mirror. That doesn't mean that they're like you. It means that they're reflecting something to you that you might be able to learn from.
I
So,
love that.
keeping that with an open heart, just like, oh, what am I here? What am I here to learn? What am I being taught? Even with your own emotions, it's like, can you look at those old emotions that you've had, all of that anger and all of that rage and all of these things that you brought with you to this point, and can you give them gratitude and appreciation for the things that they've taught you and the ways that they've protected you instead of like trying to fight them? Can we just let them be like water and roll over us and say, thank you so much for that way that you've protected me and all of these things. And now I accept that it's not something that I need anymore. And we can begin to transition into a new space with a new relationship with what we've known previously.
Beautiful. I talked to a first responder the other day, and he was sharing about his shell that he became. And this is so true for a lot of warriors. And I'm sure you would have millions of stories like this as well of, the military veterans and first responders that you've supported. And the same is true for me, where I became so defensive.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone external to me was my enemy. everyone was against me. And I became this person I didn't recognize, where I was short, angry, bitter, impatient. I wouldn't make eye contact with anyone. Literally
Mm-hmm.
nobody. I would walk down a hallway, my neighbor would be passing me. You would think I would be like, hey. And instead, I would divert my eyes away, avoid even facing them with my body language, and just like want the interaction to be done. And this
Mm-hmm.
would be true for coworkers, relationships, like not even able to make eye contact because I'm so defensive. And that ruined my life doing it that way.
Mm-hmm.
Like where you're just going around the world creating enemies, even in LA traffic, like nobody in LA traffic cares about me, or like they're not worried about, they're not thinking
Mm-hmm.
negatively about me, right? Yet I'm in the car like, get out of my way, I'm gonna end you. Like I'm just like so angry, like who am I angry at and why? We're all just going to different places. And so I know this is true for a lot of warriors and people that are listening to this call, and you don't have to be a veteran or a first responder to feel or find yourself in this state of just being defensive all the time. This can happen to everybody, but it becomes this way because you're hardened by trauma or abuse or life in general. It can be anything. And if you
Mm-hmm.
find yourself in this way, what I encourage you to do is to understand that you're not alone. This is normal. This is our body's way of protecting us. This is a survival state, but that there is hope to get beyond it and to release it and to let it go.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wanted to talk a little bit about that. Like, if someone's finding themselves in this like hardened, bitter, angry, violent state that they just don't recognize, and this could probably even lead us into my favorite part of integration, which is the power of community. But, tell me a little bit about your advice and tips for people who are in this state and how they can start releasing some of that tension and dropping some of those boundaries to let people love them and let them in.
I love that. Well, there are so many ways that we can do this. I think number one is just slowing down and being really present. Stop numbing out. If there's something that is impulsively um, impulsively move towards, to numb out, create some distance between you and that thing, right? So if you are utilizing alcohol to help you, with your mood so you can relax, try some relaxation exercises prior to drinking anything. Give yourself 15, 20, 25 minutes to do some breathing, go outside, do some journaling, sit with the emotions that are coming up, and then at least make an informed choice about what you want to do so that we're not doing things impulsively. Because you may just find that after you work through that emotion that's coming up, then you no longer have that impulse. And so it can create a stretch of of a cognitive choice of the time that we have the ability to make some cognitive choices around what it is that we're doing. Um, get out and choose healthy things. Go for a walk, move your body, get some sunshine. Those things are so simple. They're so easy. But also, like we said, watch the content of your life. If you're listening to angry, mean music, we're going to take on that frequency, that vibration. So, utilize things that feel calming. And we talked about mindfulness and meditation and present moment focus, breathing. All of those things help to kind of off gas some of these big emotions as they're coming up, even if they've been there for a long, long time. I know plenty of people who have had some pretty severe PTSD who've never gone through plant medicine, but who have been able, through mindfulness and meditation and breath work, be able to move into a state of calming their nervous system. When you have a calm nervous system, going back to that glass, when you dump all of that excess out, you have room to put in what it is that you want to purposefully embody, right? So, if we've been ragey and we've been angry and we've been short and we've been depressed, when we pour out some of that energy, we can put in, oh, I can be present, or I can connect to other people, or I can have self-compassion, or I'm beginning to learn what love looks like for myself or other people. And, I've had plenty of experience probably thousands of experiences of talking with people where they're like, oh, that's disgusting. Self-love, compassion. Okay, well then don't try to make it such a lofty goal to have self-compassion. Can we maybe tolerate ourselves? You know, can we like be somewhere on the continuum of like hate and self-love? Like, can we maybe just tolerate who we are for just a minute? And then, really just like, I think one thing that I talked to you about too is like naming your brain, right? So if you are hypercritical of yourself, notice the criticism. Oh, there's that critical thought. But I like to tell people those thoughts are oftentimes not even us thinking those thoughts. Those are thoughts that have been handed down throughout a lifetime, and then we've adopted them to keep us safe. So I like to help disconnect people from that and name your brain. Like I will name mine something like Enid. I have different names all the time, but if I notice that I'm being self-critical, then I'm like, okay, I picture this old woman like chucking rocks at a little kid who's just outside having a great time looking at bugs, right? Like that's Enid. So if I'm judging myself, I might be like, oh yeah, Enid's on one. She's super judgy today. And then it helps to kind of create a distance between me and the thought, and it doesn't feel like it's sitting as mine. It's like something that I'm observing instead. So there's a million and one different ways that we can do it, but I would say the most important thing, which you mentioned, is do it with people that get you. Do it with people who are already emulating what it is that you want to be.
Mm,
So community, right? Get involved with people who are healthy, who are living lifestyles in the way that you want to live your lifestyle,
mm,
because it's absolutely critical. You can look up the study on Rat Park. They actually had um, some rats that they gave some drugs to. They had them separated from the community of rats, and the rats got addicted to this drug. But then when they put them back in with the milieu or the other group of rats, even when that rat was still offered the same drug, they didn't take it because they didn't need it, because they were getting what they needed from community. And humans are social animals. We don't like to think of ourselves as animals, but we are animals and we are social animals. We have to have community. And, we've just moved so far away from that as a culture where we're all like just very autonomous and individual, and we're not sitting around campfires anymore and eating and telling stories and passing down wisdom. Um, and all of those things are really, really important because that's how we used to learn and that's how we connect. And also there's this thing called oxytocin, which is like the love hormone. It's an incredibly important hormone that we get in our body when we are in states of creating oxytocin. We're in a learning state, because when we're in a state of getting oxytocin, we're not creating a bunch of cortisol and other stress hormones that take us out of our ability to be present and learn. So you're lowering inflammation by being around people that you love. Hopefully you're learning some new skills and you're just normalizing your experience. So
mm.
yeah, healing happens in community. I know I've said it a million, trillion times. I'll never back off of that because I think it's such an important aspect of our humanity is connecting again. Plus with trauma, the one thing that tends to happen is people disconnect, right? Because they feel so unsafe or so unheard, or they're afraid they're going to hurt somebody or they're going to be hurt. And so, practicing that ability to connect again, it's really important.
Yeah, I will just share really briefly my own personal testimony about community. I isolated myself. I looked at other women as the enemy, as I wouldn't say competition necessarily, but just I looked at them as adversary to me. And I didn't enjoy, I didn't have a big group of girlfriends. I didn't enjoy the company of other women. I was annoyed by them. They were frictious to me. And what I realized as I was doing my healing work, that was coming from me having a really awful relationship with my mother. And when I went through my healing retreat, for the first time in my life, I wanted community. And I came out of
Mm-hmm.
my psilocybin journey and I went into it annoyed with one of my housemates that was going through. I went through with 10 other women, which annoyed me, by the way. I didn't even want to come to a retreat that had 10 other women. It was annoying to me. And I was like, oh man, I got to be around all these girls. I was in the military for 16 years with mostly men. And,
Hmm.
I just, the thought of being around weak, gossiping women was like annoying to me. I just didn't want anything to do with it.
Hmm.
So anyway, I go through this plant medicine retreat, and this woman was there who immediately I was like, I'm not going to like you. And I'm already externalizing, right? So I'm getting there. I'm in my old habits and my old ways, deciding before she's even done anything to warrant it. I'm looking at this individual and I'm like, I don't like you. I don't want to be around you. I don't want to talk to you. You're annoying. I can already tell. And then I go through psilocybin. And in my journey, this person became my mother. Her face swapped to my mother's face. And looking back at her now, I'm sure she won't mind me saying that, her and I have become so close. And she literally braided my hair while I was there. She acted
Mm.
like my mother in the retreat, which I really needed. And my plant medicine journey, basically the visions I was having, it undid the layers of trauma I had from my own mother. And it just instilled like this closeness and this beautifulness of having women around me and feminine energy around me, which I had not had my whole life. And as I was coming out of my plant medicine, you, along with many other beautiful women that were there, surrounded me and were giving me water and making sure I was okay and asking me for what I needed and providing it and just being maternal and motherly and beautiful. And you and I and these other beautiful women had the most incredible experience. And I'll never forget it because it was a beautiful, welcoming back to my own femininity and letting go of having to be so masculine and so independent and so isolated on my own. It was this birth into true community and loving nature and femininity, and that it's okay to trust others to give you what you need and to rely on them and to share stories with them and community with them. I'd never had that. And so I have to just emphasize the power of it. And now I join a call every single week to connect with that same group of women that I went through, and I lean
Mhm.
on them. If I'm struggling with something or having a hard day, we're talking to each other frequently, and we're involved in each other's lives, and we're all identifying with one another and supporting one another in our healing journey. And this has been months later now since we left, so I just can't emphasize enough for those of you at home listening, that if you are someone who's like that, where you're isolating or you're looking at a specific gender, it could be the opposite. The same could be true for men. If men don't want to be around other men,
Mhm.
that you're probably just around the wrong ones. And
Mm.
keep looking for people that you connect with, relate with, but before you do that work to look and connect, be ready to receive and be ready to
Mm.
actually connect, because you might be it might be the neighbor that you're avoiding eye contact with when you walk down the hallway like I do. That might be the person that starts you being able to connect with community and just the power of it. So it's so beautiful. And I'm just so appreciative for, being able to get to a state where I could finally even trust anybody, let alone
Yeah.
a 10 group of women that I went through a retreat with. So,
Yeah. Well, and how beautiful that you're in a space where you can trust yourself to be able to navigate through that. I think sometimes there is that aspect of like, well, I don't really know how to navigate through that. And so I just want to avoid that, based
mm,
off of our past experiences. But I mean, what an incredible repair that is of that ability to connect to other really strong women and, to be able to challenge that thought process that comes along behind it and breathe into it and allow yourself to be really present with it. There are so many really powerful and amazing people in this world, and they show up in all kinds of different ways to teach us something. And I talk a lot about this concept of like practice people. We get practice people coming into our lives all the time.
mm,
Again, going back to like, what are they teaching us? How are we practicing moving through life given their interaction with us? And so we're all practicing with people, and there's
mm,
nothing wrong with that. We don't have to get it right. We just hopefully can be in a state where we're open to receiving the gift of connection with other people. And, when we create the ability for our own being to be present, that's a really good start, because if we're not present, we're going to miss those opportunities. So, coming back to like utilizing the practices and breathing and just noticing what it is that's around you, so that you can get in touch with that sensation of what is this actually like to be in an environment where I am connected to another human being, and how can I allow that to happen, so that I can continue to learn and practice these skills to move through life and hone them in, so that I can engage in relationships that really are very nurturing and well balanced.
Yeah, and I love that for two reasons, because you're talking about being more aware, in the sense that you're not allowing things to just happen to you and being reactive, but you're actually like an
Mhm.
active participant in how you engage with what's going on around you, where you're first able to observe, take a beat. How do you want to respond? Do you want to
Mhm.
just let it go? Do you want to move on? Versus being in that survival state where
Yeah.
some guy cuts you off in line at the grocery store, and you're already like, what the hell are you doing, man? And you're or the same with traffic. But instead you're like observing this person cut you off. Well, hold on, did they even see you standing there? Were you close enough that they thought you were in line? Like,
Mhm.
actually engage with the situation, be present in the moment, be present in the happenings around you, to make an educated decision on how you want to respond, if you want to respond, right? So that was the difference for me, was realizing I had that ability to have that control, to take a beat, to take a breath first, so I'm not
Yeah.
just shooting from the hip and
Yeah.
being out of control. So I love that. One of the things I wanted to cover too is this topic. I had a conversation with someone yesterday, and it was just a casual conversation at an office I was at. I was in the waiting area, and I was at this like brain center that I go to sometimes. And
Mm.
I was in the waiting room, and one of the office girls that works there, she came over and she was talking to me, and she was like, "Oh man, I'm just so proud of how far you've come." And she was talking, loud enough that the people in the waiting room could hear me. And this guy was sitting in there, and he was like, "Well, how did you get the results? What did you think?" Because he was obviously his first day there. He'd never been there, etc. And I started talking to him about all the things I did, the 360-degree changes I made. I talked about plant medicine. I talked about journaling. I talked about breathing exercises, all of that. And I noticed he was scoffing at certain things, right? Breathwork, ugh.
Mm.
Journaling, ew. Right? Like he was like, sleep pattern, cutting coffee,
Mhm.
no way. He literally said, I'll never cut coffee. Right?
Yeah.
And so what I want to just quickly cover is, how bad does it have to get before you make a change, right? Because a lot of people that are hearing
Mhm.
this content right now, or have seen some of my other videos, they're probably like, "Oh, well, I just need the plant medicine."
Yeah.
Right. And or maybe they won't even do that. Maybe they're like, "Oh, these are all woo woo things. They're, oh,
Yeah.
spiritual stuff, no. Breathing, no. Yoga, ew." Right? Like they have these frictious feelings towards things that they are preconceived in their mind, that they're like, "That's not going to work for me." Breathing, that's not going to work for me.
Yeah.
Regulating my sleep, going to bed by 9, that is not going to work for me. There's no way that I will reach out and talk to my neighbor. That's just not going to work for me, right? They're already writing off these things before they've even tried them, like truly given
Mhm.
it a full deep dive commitment to try them. So I want to talk about that. Like, how bad does it have to get before you try woo woo things?
There will be resistance for sure. And even when it's working, there will still be resistance. How bad does it need to get? I typically will say that people will not change until they are so tired of their own bullshit that they don't have a choice.
Mm.
So luckily, everybody has kind of a different disposition with this. Some people kind of notice themselves sliding initially, and they're like, oh, course correction immediately. The problem with, especially if we have complex trauma, is that all of these resistant behaviors, it's like a ticking of a clock. Tick, 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 tick. Like we don't notice it after a long period of time. We're so used to navigating life in the way that we navigate it that typically what happens is it comes down to you've got a husband or a wife who's like, I'm not doing this with you anymore. So, obviously as a human being, I would prefer to see people not getting to that point, but I also do understand that it oftentimes takes people getting to that rock bottom stage before something is going to shift. So typically what I see with people who have been really resistant to healing is that they either are going to lose a relationship or they're going to lose that relationship with themselves completely. And, I'm really referencing suicidality, which is something that we talk about a lot with our clients because people they're tired. They don't want to experience what they're experiencing. And so they want to leave this world. Um, and so that typically is where I see people, when they come in. I think my hope is that we have enough people doing these practices, which, all of these practices, they have a lot of empirical evidence behind them. It's funny, you look at yoga and you look at meditation, you look at mindfulness, and people are like, yeah, that's super woo. Or even like doing energy work, right? Like that's super woo. I don't want to do that. That's weird. Those for hippies. But we have data now that actually shows that these things are scientifically evident. I don't know why we're always looking for proof of something to work instead of just feeling that it works. But, the good news is we can do both. We've got our people now who just are like, I trust in the feeling of it working and I trust in the science of it working. And the good news is there's lots of ways that you can get there, but you have to get off of your own door. If you're standing on your own door, obviously you're not going to go anywhere. Like you've got to move off of the door so that you can open it and begin to move through. But the biggest thing is just like, what is your attitude about healing too? Because I've also known lots of people who have, this isn't going to work for me. This isn't going to work for me. And like, yeah, you come down and you sit with psychedelics and then you go back home and you drink when you get home. It's not that the psychedelics didn't work for you. They're not going to make that choice for you. You have to make the choice. So it's giving you a window of opportunity to begin to make different choices. And if you choose not to, it's not because the medicine didn't work. It's because you've made a decision, you've made a decision not to engage with your community, not to continue with nervous system regulation. You've made a decision not to. And then the opposite is also true. Sometimes people come home after these experiences like, I feel great. I don't need to do anything. I'm fixed. Very short window of time that we typically feel that way. And then stuff comes piling back. So it's really important that, we have these patterns and these behaviors and these positive habits, in our day-to-day life, even leading up to these big experiences so that they're just habitual in nature. We're already over the resistance of it. There's always going to be some resistance somewhere, I think, for a majority of people, especially if there's an emotion or a situation that we're not like really ready to go into. And that's fine. We just recognize that it's there and that we're making a choice not to engage with it. But I think giving ourselves permission to A, feel the resistance, and B, be open to the possibility that it could work is, kind of the secret sauce of all of this. If you don't have a mindset that there is a possibility or a potential that something can change, then you're going to require that the whole world proves it to you that it will. And typically we're going to find what we're looking for, because we're phenomenal pattern finders. We even have a part in our brain that like is designed specifically to look for patterns. It's our reticular activating system. And so if you have already decided that you are not going to make progress by doing mindfulness, meditation, breathing, community, etc., then you're going to be looking for evidence that's going to prove you right, and you'll find it. But the same can be said on the other side too.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I almost am like, because of my own experience, wherever you're feeling the friction is probably exactly what you need. That's
Yep.
probably your body telling you, hey, that thing right there, I don't want to go there because, it's exactly what I need. And an example of that is the one I shared already about, meeting that person at my retreat who I was like, I don't
Hmm.
like you. I don't know why I don't like you, but I don't like you. I don't want to talk to you. I don't want to deal with you. And it's because it was the deepest trauma I have, which was my mom trauma
Right.
that started when I was a kid. And it was nothing to do with this sweet, beautiful woman. I was just automatically putting on her something that wasn't hers to own. And, I
Yeah.
didn't want to engage with her. I didn't want to interact with her just inherently because she reminded me of my mom. And
Right.
that was exactly what I needed to deal with. And so I encourage, especially if you're someone listening to this call where you're like, cut coffee? Absolutely not. If you have anxiety nonstop, how much do you love that anxiety? Do you love the anxiety or do you love the idea of maybe not having anxiety more? So it's like,
Hmm.
how bad do you want it? How bad do you want the healing? Because that will determine whether you're ready to go into a healing experience, whether you'll give it the full commitment that it needs, because you can't half-ass this stuff. If you truly want healing, you actually want to stop the patterns and the behaviors and the results in life that you're getting. Like if you're constantly married and divorcing, you're constantly losing your job, you're constantly losing your shit on the road, and you can't even have a single car ride. I couldn't go to the grocery store, right, without losing my shit on the road and having a road rage incident. Losing friendships, you name it. So how bad? Ask yourself this at home. How bad do things have to get before you're willing to try some of these techniques? I would encourage you, like Katie said, to handle it before it gets that bad. But sometimes it's going to take you getting all the way to rock bottom before
Hmm.
you're realizing, man, the work really is with me. It's not outward and everyone coming inward. If you're finding yourself in that defensive place where you're pointing your finger outward at everybody else, everything else is the problem. My wife's the problem. My husband is the problem, my job is the problem, my coworker's the problem, this guy who cut me off at the grocery store is a problem, right? If you're constantly pointing your finger outward and being defensive, it's probably time. I'm saying this with love. It's probably time you point it back at yourself, dude.
Yeah.
And do some of that work. And there's a lot of great free resources out there. So, Katie, thank you so much for spending all of this incredible time with us. I'm sure so many people, given your background, would love to connect with you. How can people connect with you and find you?
Yeah. I am on LinkedIn under Catherine LaRoe. You can find me there. I am also on Instagram at Catherine underscore LaRoe underscore integrative coach. Um, and I have a website, catherinelaroe.com. So any one of those are easily accessible. Just send me a message.
Amazing. I'll hyperlink everything. And I did hear some rumblings. I don't know if maybe a potential podcast or something you're developing here in the future. Maybe I'm,
Wow.
well, if
We're
that
just gonna
happens,
put it out in the
I
universe right
am. I
now.
am. I'm totally throwing her under the bus because she needs her
You can
own
throw me under the bus.
podcast for sure.
I actually remember that whole thing about standing on your own door. I'm totally doing that with this podcast. But this podcast is an idea that we've had for, I don't know, probably 10 years or so since I was, working in IOP. And I had the greatest group of people that I worked with. I mean, it really was like none of us would have survived, I think, in that environment because it was so intense and the trauma was just so big that we laughed. We laughed and we laughed and we had red cards all the time. And, we had great discussions. Most of them were highly irreverent and inappropriate, about just life. And, it was our survival. And so I thought of this idea of creating this podcast called Bad Therapist, where, we just show up and we just be human and we talk
Mhm.
about human things and how it also relates to therapy, but talking about things that other people don't necessarily want to talk about, like relationships and shadow work, but, in kind of an irreverent, fun kind of way, and also very serious and deep. I mean, we're going to laugh, we're going to cry. It's going to be super raw, really honest. So yeah, we're in works of putting that together right now. I'm super excited to unveil it. We're also going to be starting up for any unlicensed student therapists out there, or people just want to get involved who are already kind of in we call them pioneers, but like in the healing community. If you want to learn more about trauma and the way that works, want to learn more about shadow work, et cetera, we're creating a community called the Wisdom Well. We want it to be a place where people come together, where there's a depth of knowledge, where we're all sharing with one another, bringing in experts to teach certain topics. So that should be up and going probably in January. That will be membership based. We're really, really excited. I'm going to be working with another incredible therapist to create that. So yeah, we've got a couple things on the horizon, which are really, really great. Some of them are, all of them actually are a blend between Eastern and Western, and what we know and in our culture kind of blended with more like nature-based medicine. And I don't mean just like plant medicine, also just like how do we connect the medicine of connection with earth and nature and other people. And yeah, so
I
there's a
love
couple
that.
things, couple different things that people can engage in, but yeah, definitely reach out if you have any questions. I can, hopefully at least try to direct you on the right path. Yeah.
Perfect. And then I do have two questions I ask every single guest that comes on the show. So the
Ooh.
first is we are a charity based organization. So we always like to champion other charities when possible. So are there any charities that you like to shout out, would like to shout out on this episode? I'll hyperlink them to the episode.
Absolutely. One of them that I work with is the Illuminating Collective. It's a church out of Austin, Texas, and we treat veterans, first responders with plant medicines. We have an incredible program of preparation and integration. So I would definitely say they would be a wonderful nonprofit to, to engage in. And it's also tax deductible. So if you want to help, it's also nice on the bank account and taxes.
Awesome. And then the second one is if somebody is in crisis right now, meaning they're in that spinning mode of not knowing if they're going to see tomorrow or not. What is one piece of advice you would give to them that they can action on right now to help them get out of that place?
Call an emergency resource immediately. California's got some really good resources. You can call the veteran helpline if you happen to be a veteran. That one's a great one because they understand where you're coming from. A lot of that is mentor based. Call a friend, but don't sit and suffer with it on your own. Seek support because you do not have to go through it alone. Even though it feels like you're doing this alone, you are not. There are lots and lots of people who love you and care for you who will show up. They just need to know how to show up. So sometimes it's the ask, the ASK, that is the most important first step.
Wow, awesome. Thank you so much, Katie. Leroux Higgs. I will hyperlink everything that you said to make it easy and accessible for our audience on the show. We really appreciate you. In love and light, everybody. Thank you so much. We'll catch you next time.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you enjoyed it, take a moment to hit the like button, leave a comment, share it with someone you love, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.